Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Hello, and welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Guess what? It's episode number 100. Craig,
no wonder I'm tired.
Craig,
Holy mackerel, 100? How'd that happen?
100. We've been doing this for 2 years. We have 100 episodes on our belt. So thank you to everybody who has tuned in, whether you've been here from the early days of the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, or whether you're brand new and are just checking this out because you're looking for information, because you work in and around PLM. We want you to keep tuning in. We've got so many more great things coming. The Digital Enterprise Society, it is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. So my name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this show with Craig Brown. Craig is an industry veteran, and he's a former PLM leader at General Motors. Craig, we made it to 100 episodes.
Yeah, it really is interesting how fast it happened. And of course, a year ago, we were beginning to wonder what the pandemic would do to us. And here we are a year later. And, the Digital Enterprise Society and what digital tools do is all part of the success story, I think, in getting through this.
It's interesting as I look back over the 2 years that we've been doing this. We started off with some episodes that were pretty hard hitting around the technology. And last year, when the pandemic hit, a lot of our interviews, even if they were with technical experts, they morphed more into sort of, what's going on with career, how are companies changing and morphing. I don't know that we did that on purpose, but I think that that's a good sign that as a podcast, we're able to go where the people are going.
Well, and unfortunately, some people, just the nature of their companies or the businesses they were in, found themselves trying to find other work, right? And that gave us maybe a new theme that we didn't expect, right? I mean, 2 years ago, we were all talking about what is this thing called a digital twin or IoT or transformation. And then a year ago, it was, well, now you have to transform or find a new work. So yeah, it's interesting how it changed. It wasn't so much about definitions and understanding anymore. It was more about coping, right?
So as we look backwards, Craig, are there any episodes or any themes that stand out to you?
Well, I'm always surprised at finding from other industries things that I learned in the car business, right? And so one of them was this whole notion around theory of constraints and optimizing manufacturing. And if you go into the history of digital tools, at least if you're an existing enterprises like car companies, it's all about streamlining manufacturing. That's why we do it all, right? Which is really different than if you're building a spaceship like the guys from JPL that are going to Mars. Well, they're building one of a kind thing, but why do they use digital tools? Well, for a different set of reasons. They can't run 100 flight tests like we would in a car company, right? So it's just interesting the times that came up. We learned about theory of constraints from a computer company. And then we learned about massive use of PLM from, guess what? We don't think of these people as PLM users, but it was Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft. And you and I had the luxury of talking to each of them at a conference out in San Diego before the pandemic. And it was interesting how similar they all were. Well, why are you using PLM? Well, for configuration management and change control and duplicating server farms around the world. For those of us that aren't technologists, how do you think all this network stuff works? Well, there are massive server farms everywhere. and somehow what we're recording is getting transferred through, probably thousands of computers on the way to your desktop. So that surprised me. And then I think the other one was just the interest. There's so many buzz terms, and I started writing down a list of them from Industry 4.0 to IoT to Agile to Digital Twin. And when we started out, I kind of just wanted to shine some light on those. What are those really? And so I did that. Now we're more talking about, okay, how do I apply them to surviving a pandemic? And that kind of brings us full circle. I did one more thing I wanted to share with you. I did a demographic study, which is what you do when you've done this for too many decades. So aero and defense, we had 5 or 6 interviews. Auto, we had 6, which is surprising. I probably would have done a lot more if I didn't conscientiously try not to. Other industries, though, like the ones I just mentioned, there was another 6. So those were all pretty equal. I don't think we set out to do that, but I'm kind of glad we did. Tool vendors, well, we had more of them than anybody because they like to come in and talk about what it is they do and how it helps with digital enterprises. And then we had a fair amount of government labs, retirees, because I think it's important that we talk to a couple of us anyways, and otherwise consultants, some specialty. So that was good. We had the ones that you did with career assistance, career advice, career coaching even, which I thought were excellent. And then you and I both have talked about the university relationship. We actually did 1/10 of our interviews either with professors or with students. And
yeah, those episodes with the graduate students at Purdue, we did one early on in the show, and then a year later, we followed up and did a second interview with them. And I thought that was really fascinating because it really looked to what are people learning and what's going on with the future of people who are entering industry.
Well, and especially the curveball they got thrown, which is, you're coming to the job market just as the pandemic is blossoming. So what are you going to do, right? And I think they're all gainfully employed, by the way, so it worked out just fine.
Well, it's interesting. You bring up the career-focused episodes. Some of my favorite episodes are the ones where I got to interview some friends of mine who are career consultants and speakers and trainers and coaches. Just episode 99 was one I really enjoyed doing, which was with my friend David Horsehager, who is the leading expert on trust in business. And so if you haven't heard it, go back one episode and listen to the one that's called Trust is Not a Soft Skill. I really liked doing those. And Craig, I didn't like them because you weren't with me. I liked them because they were fun to do, sort of that career-focused, topics. I missed having you there, Craig.
It's just because we're not talking about the difference between Michigan and Texas. That's all.
Hook 'em horns, Craig. Hook 'em horns.
Yeah, we won't talk about the tournament.
Well, today, Craig, we're going to introduce something new that's going to be an ongoing series here on the Digital Enterprise Society. Are you excited?
Oh, yeah. I think it's time to mix it up and try something different. And I think, I love being a host. I like questioning and pursuing things. But I'm like anybody else. I come with a bias, right?
You have Craig, you have opinions? What?
And so what Courtney and I and you and you've heard Mark before on our broadcast, so we're going to introduce Mark here in a second. We thought it would be interesting for us to have different points of view, meaning purposely set up one of us to be one point of view and one be the other point of view, and then discuss some key topics. And we got a list of about 10, and we're going to do the first one today.
Well, and it kind of reminds me of the old days of Saturday Night Live with point, counterpoint. And so we're going to go into what we are calling the digital battle. And so this is something brand new that we're going to do. It's a series of episodes where Craig and Mark Pendergast are going to debate a topic. I'm going to help moderate it. And these battles, will happen every few weeks. And so to start us off, today's topic is going to be the roles of business and IT in digital transformation. It's going to be about who should lead. And we're also going to talk about the roles of the vendor, the outsourcer, and the consultant.
Okay, this is interesting. So I've always been on the business side. And hopefully my counterpart won't mind being on the IT side. Let's find out.
All right, so today we are joined by Mark Pendergast. And Mark he actually has the role of trustee for content for the Digital Enterprise Society. He is retired from a very successful career. And in part of his role with Digital Enterprise Society, he has launched a new blog called Digital Guideposts. And you can find that on the digitalenterprisesociety.org site. Hey, Mark, welcome back. We've interviewed you before. Welcome back to the podcast.
Well, it's good to be here, Thom. I really enjoy working with you guys. Of course, Craig and I are no stranger to these battles. I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, but Craig and I tend to attend seminars that were put on by some of the vendors, or we'd get together at conferences, and invariably we would end up on opposite sides of some issue, driving the discussion on something. And I think, Craig, I think that's why they invited us back a lot of times, was we were the guys that were moving the discussion.
Well, I think it's important to move the discussion. Sometimes we learn better through hearing, at least this is the American view, hearing opposing views, right? You don't want to hear the same thing from everybody. Then you begin to wonder if it's based in enough analysis or enough fact. So, right. Yeah, I remember our discussions at Purdue quite well. I look forward to the next one face to face. Sadly, we're still a few months away from that, but when it happens, so it'll be fun to get back together. And Thom, just so you know, we do share a geographical history from the center of Indiana. We were both located in the same facilities, though not quite at the same times. And system. Well, yeah, some of the systems I dabbled in, he had to deal with. So that's where we are.
All right. Well, everybody fasten your seatbelt. This is our first Digital Enterprise Society podcast, The Digital Battle. So as we look at the roles of business and IT, Craig's going to take business, Mark's going to take IT. So I have a question for you guys. Who should lead?
Well, I don't know. Come on, Mark. Who should lead?
Well, I think I'm going to chicken out on this one. And what I'm going to tell you is the person that should lead is the person that has the skills and the knowledge to lead.
Oh, but that's rarely the case.
That's rarely the case. I was very fortunate that the one big one that they let me do, I was the guy who had spent the time in the business, spent the time in IT, knew where all the skeletons were buried, and it was very, very effective. But as you're correct, that's very rare these days. People aren't allowed to have that broad background. They tend to stick in one spot and have a very limited viewpoint.
I know we're supposed to argue for the audience, but I have a similar background, and I attribute it to commercial companies, especially car companies. They really do let those of us that have a track record get into those leadership positions. I think people struggle way too much with this question about business or IT should lead. It depends on, what I've seen is it really depends on who's benefiting, right? So for years, we were all part of General Motors in one way or another. And I saw different leadership styles from the senior executives down through the ranks to people like you and I trying to lead initiatives. And what I noticed, what worked, is when everybody was aligned on similar measures, whether that's profitability or time to market or whatever. And the times were the worst for people like you and I. It was when the measures were really different. So the IT department, the new gunslinger was brought into town and told, go fix everything. Well, business be damned, the IT leadership was going to go fix everything, right? And that really led to a lot of waste, in my mind, a lot of wasted effort, a lot of wasted focus. And eventually those folks, they don't stick around. I'll just leave it at that. But they usually leave for their own reasons. But
I think it's been a journey. And I remember, when I hired in, IT was the mainframe. And little shadow IT groups kind of grew up in all the engineering disciplines and operations and wherever. And these were people that were maybe not great at IT, but they really understood the business problems. Yeah, and I was one of those guys. Yeah. And you're struggling and you don't really have the tools, but you're trying to make it better. And you know what you need to accomplish, and then IT kind of expanded out of the mainframe and we consolidated everybody into one central IT group. And for a while that was good because you still had the business knowledge, but then you also had the tool set and developers and things that you could move around. And I think we're getting to that now post-consolidation era where you have people in IT that don't know the business.
Well, and that is one of the biggest problems. So, in I'll call it the 90s and 2000s and before, leadership was developed in a company by sending you around to different jobs, maybe even taking a job outside of engineering and into IT and then come back, right? Partly so that you could appreciate the differences. With the pace of computers changing, the way things are served, these cloud services and so on, it's almost impossible to be an effective engineering leader and also be on top of all that technology. So you're right. The boundaries of IT have gone way beyond the computer on your desktop that you can control yourself, back to what feels more like mainframes, but it's so much more because all kinds of things can be delivered via clouds that people wouldn't even imagine. And when you ask a leader today, well, where's your computing actually done? I suspect nobody knows. I mean, it's our central cloud server over here in this suburb of Detroit, or gosh forbid, it's somewhere in the Amazon infrastructure for all kinds of clouds. So it changes really fast. And I think it gets back to any kind of leadership. Let's agree on what we're going to value, what we're measuring, and then let's go work together to fix that. So Thom, your question, I would really love people to figure out how to work together, including if your measures are different, right? Your boss's boss, so they're giving you what success means. If they're different, well, then you might want to sit those bosses down together and say, okay, they're different. Do you really want us to work at cross purposes, right? And just have an open conversation about it. It'll improve the outcome if you do that. You may not get alignment because sometimes things are driven by different things, right? But you'll at least get awareness that there's going to be a built-in tension because of the different metrics.
Yeah, I think getting back to the original point, I'll put my correct hat on now. I think for a digital transformation, IT has to lead, and not lead for the whole thing, but to be the instigator or the initiator or the prophet in the wilderness, explaining what can be done. Because like you said, business leaders are too busy with the day-to-day right now. The biggest problem I have with executives is they don't do strategy anymore. They're just glorified managers. And they don't think out like Steve Jobs. You don't have too many Steve Jobs or Musk or, any of those guys that are really looking out in the future. They're just trying to make the next quarter.
So I want to, like I do with all guests, I want to make sure people understood what you just said. You said managers. You really mean with a focus on administration. Just hit the numbers. The heck with where's the company need to be in 2 years when everything else recovers from the pandemic, right? So, yeah. Okay. So let me get the last word. So as the business, how is it possible you can tell me what can be done if you don't understand my processes? And to me, there's the conundrum, right? The IT guys bring new technology and the business guy says, but until you understand my processes, don't bother me. Leave me alone.
Right. And that's why a lot of these digital transformation efforts fail, because we either make them too tactical or we're just putting in fancy new shiny stuff and you don't really change how the business works. Mm-hmm. Or I've seen a lot of them where you just go overboard and you say, I'm ripping out everything and completely changing everything. And then there's just no anchor. And then you're just adrift and they don't know how to get back.
Well, that's usually a sign of frustration, right? You're just desperate, right?
And that kind of leads into the next question. And that next question is, so what's the catalyst for digital transformation? What's driving this in a company?
Well, I can tell you the main one is crisis. There's nothing like crisis to get people to move, because when everything's comfortable, it's too risky to try something different. But when you've got and I think we've got a ready-made crisis right now, which is why you're seeing a lot of efforts going on, is we just have, you're not allowed to do business the way you used to do it. You've got to do something different. And this has been where the business and IT have locked themselves in a room and said, this is existential. This is survival. What can we do? And those real hard discussions that Craig and I mentioned earlier are starting to happen. And they're starting to learn, what do we need? What does doing business mean today? What is all this technology? Is there anything out there that can help me do this, this, and this that I can't do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. Never waste a good catastrophe, right? I mean, sometimes that's how you get everybody motivated. I think before the current pandemic, I think a lot of companies were struggling with, well, am I just trying to improve the bottom line? In other words, instead of spending $10 per seat, I want to spend $9 per seat. And so there was this incremental cost crunching thing going on, which if you're in a publicly traded company, happens all the time, right? You want to go get that next thing. And that's so short-term focused, right? On the other hand, sometimes you realize, and I think the car business is there right now, that the thing you've been doing for 100 years really does have to fundamentally change. And assuming you fix this thing called range anxiety, so how far can you drive on a tank of energy? If you can solve that problem, then all of a sudden we won't be consuming oil-based fuels anymore. We'll instead consume electricity, which hopefully comes from wind or sun or water rather than from burning some fossil fuel.
Well, but Craig, you're not even out far enough.
Well, probably.
The new generation doesn't even want a car.
Well, I know.
They just want transportation.
So electrify it and then get me from point A to point B. You're absolutely right. So what's the catalyst? Changing consumers, changing conditions, at least for commercial companies, it's that. And then efficiency is always one of them. Somebody, when everything else is sort of quieted down, some MBA trained executive will come back and say, hey, I want the next 10% of savings. Just do it. Right. And that's often led by IT, and it puts IT in an undesirable position because they come into the business and they say, well, I got to change to save some money. And the business says, why? We're making lots of money. Why do we have to save some money? And, it's what MBAs are trained to do. Look at a spreadsheet and save some money.
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the things I struggled with late in my career is IT has become a cost center to be reduced.
It's always a cost center. That's part of the problem. You need to be a profit center.
Well, we need to be an enabler. And
well,
I saw a great webinar, probably 2 months ago, where the guy said, IT needs to be a tool to make the business work better, not a separate thing.
Well, yeah, bravo. I agree. And I think, knowing the benefit IT brings, this is part of the conundrum, right? A lot of times the silo around IT or the silo around a part of your company, like the part that does boring stuff like logistics and contracting, it's a well-oiled machine. It works really well, even if it is on old mainframes or outdated IT technology. So when the IT guy comes in and says, I can save you some money by putting it in the cloud, the other people are like, yeah, but it works really well. Don't break it. Right. And so this don't break it thing comes from a practiced history of excellence that especially if you're in the second and third generation of the users, they really don't understand how it was put together in the first place. And they are fearful of changing it. Right. So,
right. Well, and as we lean people out, the first people to go are the people that are the system thinkers and the generalists. And you just get people that can do their little narrow piece. And
why is it that the first to go are the systems thinkers? What's behind that? Well, wait a minute. I'm not the host.
Because they're not going to save that. They're not saving that 10%. They're the ones trying to spend 10% more to get that value out the door.
I see. They're not valued at that moment in time. Well, that's true. Yeah. So we just go find a greener pasture.
Well, as we look at all of this digital transformation, and like you're saying, cost centers versus being able to enable savings, et cetera, how long is the horizon on payback for a company when it comes to their digital transformation initiatives?
Well, that is a good question. And I think it depends on how big you want to go. How much risk do you want to take on? And today, businesses are not big into taking risks unless they're in an existential crisis. But I think what they get trapped in is some of the tactical efforts, save a couple of bucks here and there. And on paper, you get a little payback, but they're not really transformation. They're digital modernization, I guess, is the word that I normally hear with them. But if you're going to take on a true transformation, takes me back to my days in manufacturing, is when we were learning just in time, which probably dates me really badly, the thing they said is, if you're going to automate, do all the process corrections first, because the phrase was always, if you automate a mess, you get an automated mess.
Yeah.
And they found that the value came from taking the kinks out of the pipe, and the automation just kind of reinforced that and kept it moving. But it was really this deep thought of, what are we doing? Is this still important? Why are we doing it? That was the real value. And that's hard to do. And it takes system thinkers, and it takes people that know what the goal of the company really is.
Well, and that's a good segue. The thing that I will gladly debate anybody with is the longer term the payback, so let's say 3 years, 5 years, the longer that term, the more likely the company is led by one of these system thinkers, probably led by an engineer or a scientist, and not led by a professional manager, administrator we talked about earlier.
Banker.
Well, bankers have engineers too, but let's not go down that rat hole. But not an administrator, not one that's got a quarterly report to write and is looking at the financial returns so that the stock prices are doing well. So I think the longer the horizon, meaning more than a year, and I prefer 3 to 5 years. Most businesses can't even see that far. But if you could do that and you got leadership that stays the course, your payback will be bigger. You'll be closer to a transformation than just incremental improvement.
So I think that's key.
So shouldn't this be a partnership between business and IT and not a competition?
Well, okay. So I have a little story. So during one of those partnership eras at my former employer, we had a big internal conference to talk about PLM. And the way we governed things, we set up teams that were partnerships. So there was an IT lead and a business lead. And so for PLM, my IT counterpart, he turned out he was from our operations in Germany. He and I were together and we were presenting to senior management. So this is to the top of engineering, right? They were coming around at the show. And engineering in this context means both manufacturing and product development. And so we were doing this tour, and I got the question from the vice president of engineering of product development. He said, so is IT involved, or is this a separate thing you're doing on the side? And I said, no, my counterpart's right here. We're presenting this together. And then I probably made the political misstep of my career. I looked him straight in the eye and I said, we're not measured the same. You're measured differently than your IT counterpart. And if the board wanted to help, they would fix that. And so we should always strive for partnership. But this point I made earlier about measures being inconsistent, there will be a competition if the measures are inconsistent. And it's at least in a large company, you can't fix that. You can observe it, you can point it out, but you really can't battle it. And so I finished my little moment in the sunlight there with a comment to all of them who were listening. I said, you really want us to go faster, get us with the same measures. And we could do even more amazing things. And the current president of General Motors, Mark was in that conversation, and he said, "Yep, it's a good point," and we moved on. So there's a rest of the story, but not for this broadcast. Anyways, so measures, it's a partnership until senior leadership makes it not a partnership. And by the way, if leadership encourages that competition, it's for a reason. Maybe they're hedging their bets and they're not sure which one's going to pay off. And so it's okay to have some of this known tension, right? Mark, what you said earlier about transformation, the thing I ended up saying in my at the end of my time with General Motors was something akin to this, which is, if you got a custom tool, custom coded, custom servers, all that stuff, and it's no longer a competitive advantage, you really should buy a commercial solution. And this was an engineering audience I was talking to. I wasn't talking to the IT audience. The IT people later applauded my efforts at trying to make this clear. And that is the real conundrum. When people build a custom system over decades, they really don't want to let go of it for lots of reasons, including process reasons. And when they don't realize anymore that it's a competitive advantage, or even worse, it's a competitive disadvantage, you really gotta question why you're still doing it. And so I think when IT brings a solution to help solve a problem, they should also bring some benchmarking data about, this custom system that we've been so proud of all these decades, it just doesn't matter anymore. And here's why it doesn't matter, and go through that analysis and explain it. And then I think the leaders in the room will get it. They may not know how to get their organization to follow, but they will get they need to change.
I think, Craig, one of the things that I've seen is engineering is following logistics, but 20 years behind. Because I remember when I hired in, it was not unreasonable to write your own MRP system.
Yeah.
They were all custom. They did things that no tool on the planet could do. And then over time, the ERPs came out, they caught up, and there really wasn't anything that they couldn't do. And I think engineering, PLM, is still at that stage where if you looked at it right, you'd say, I could write one better than any of these.
Yeah.
And we're because 20 years ago, you had to write your own because all you had was toolkits. Now you're saying, I'm kind of on the fence. So I'm hoping 20 years from now, people will say it's ridiculous to be customizing this PLM. It just does everything I need it to do.
Well, it takes this willingness to embrace new ways of working. And if the new ways are really different from the old ways and the old ways are proven, that's really hard. Now, if the new ways are just new and you're in a new business, like I've been fascinated watching these electric vehicle startup companies, right? They don't have a lot of this baggage. They have some old experienced people they've hired, but they don't have the baggage of IT systems or their old processes, right? So yeah, all of a sudden they're free to try new things, and they find out, oh, this is pretty cool. This stuff already works, right? I don't have to go build an IT department to go build one. So, but the vendors, solution providers, we call them in some circles, they are both part of the solution and part of the problem, and part of the problem is they oversell, and they're part of the solution because they really do understand the IT technology that's so pervasive now, meaning cloud-based everything and interconnectivity.
But back to your original point, Craig, they don't know how to use their own products.
The sales guys don't for sure. Right. Yeah. Well, and to be honest, the products are Swiss Army knives, right? They're extremely flexible. And so that makes it even easier to customize them or at least configure them, which by the way, advertisement, that's a future debate we're going to have, customization versus configuration. But
All right. So before we wrap up this episode, I want to hear, we're going to start with unsuccessful digital transformation initiatives. You guys have been around a long time. You have to have seen some companies try some stuff and it went, wah, wah, wah. So real quick, what are some examples of not successful digital transformation initiatives?
Well, I've got a few that some of them are kind of older, but I do remember reading in the literature that Hershey put in a brand new ERP system, redid all their processes right before Halloween, their biggest sales day of the year, and it didn't work. And they couldn't ship, they couldn't even take orders, let alone ship them. And it nearly put them out of business. Because
and that guy is a consultant now, right? The one that made that decision.
they overreached.
Yeah.
I'm trembling at the thought of not having special darks for Halloween.
Oh yeah. I think another one is that big media right now is failing. Remember, all the newspapers put up websites, and then they put up paywalls, and that was a digital transformation for them that I think just completely fell on its face. I don't know anybody that's making significant revenue off online paywalls. I was just at Purdue. Well, I don't know, the last time they let us go to Purdue, and I had a casual hallway conversation with somebody from one of the big A&D companies, and they said they were like $400 or $500 million into a nearly $1 billion PLM transformation, and no end in sight.
And it was probably led by IT, and the business processes didn't want to change. I'll just bet $1 that's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So mine involve the more unsuccessful ones always occur where there's this tension, competition that probably was unintended, but it's because of the measures. And so you'll hear me talk about that a lot. The unsuccessful ones are because the measures are either ill conceived, meaning they naturally conflict, but people didn't realize it when they set it up, or it's purposeful because the board wants to accomplish one thing with one group and a different thing with a different group. And so until you observe that built-in atrophy and tension that's occurring, breakage that's occurring, you really can't fix it. And I think that's why measures are important. Whenever you're doing a digital transformation of any sort, or even just a transformation, you should be clear what success is supposed to feel like. And you should have an idea of that, and you should make it clear, and you should monitor it. Maybe not daily, but certainly quarterly or monthly, you should monitor. Are we making progress to it? And if not, don't be afraid to change.
All right. I want to switch over to the other side. Let's hear a couple of examples of successful digital transformation initiatives. Craig, why don't you go first? Process
first, then tools. Every time I did that, and I'm not a process person, I'm a technologist, tool guy, right? And what I learned through the School of Hard Knocks was process drives tools. And so, the measure of success is just efficiency of tools. I don't need 29 CAD systems, even though I got 29 departments. I only need one CAD system, and the 29 departments need to adjust. And it turned out 20 of them did, and the 9 that didn't eventually didn't have a choice. So the transformation for digital technologies is really one about look at your process as well, figure out where your constraints are, theory of constraints we talked about earlier, and then optimize your tool chain around that, and then let everybody else know you can use it. Don't come argue with me why you need your own tools. Use the one we've provided. And, I had a couple cases where those people begrudgingly used the tools and then had good cases why we couldn't keep using the tools because it was a deficiency in the common solution. But at least we learned together what it was that was so important that wasn't being done properly. We didn't go back to the legacy tool, by the way. We just came up with a better idea along the way. So that's a point about be willing to change when you realize you're not quite achieving what you expected. And then don't be naive. The solution vendors all think they've got the greatest thing in the world, and they have some pretty good things, by the way. But they may not understand the real constraint in your company, right? And if they don't be naive and assume they can fix all your problems. Rather, just understand their strengths and take advantage of them, right? And where they're weak, be willing to fix that some other way.
Okay, well, Craig took the inside view, which I think is the boring view of digital transformation.
Well, thank you.
I want to look at some examples where people reinvented themselves. And the first one, again, I'll draw back on a real old one that comes to mind, is FedEx. FedEx beat UPS because even though they couldn't deliver packages as well as UPS, they knew where they were because they tracked them all with barcodes. And this was the deciding factor. In fact, UPS had to play catch up. UPS had a system that delivered that package no matter what. That package would get where it was supposed to go. Everything in their process was biased to deliver it, but they had no idea where it was when it was getting there. And FedEx said, I bet people really want to just have that assurance that they know that it's moving. And that completely transformed delivery now. You get the tracking number on everything. You can watch it scan barcode to barcode to barcode in every facility as it moves. So that, I think, was a huge success. That transformed.
By the way, I think the pandemic has helped UPS catch up with FedEx, By the way. At least in my personal experience, we're having more trouble tracking that it's the last 100 miles, right, of a FedEx package than we are in a UPS package. Kind of interesting.
Yeah. The other one that I'd like to do is a big one that everybody knows about because they're one of the biggest company, probably the biggest company in the world right now, is Apple. Apple used to make stuff. They'd put atoms together and ship it out in a box. And today, Apple, they sell their ecosystem. They could almost give away the stuff in the box for free because they've got this blend of service and experience and connectivity that they just completely transformed who they were. And became one of the biggest, went from a niche player to being the go-to. And amazing vision of Steve Jobs to just say, making stuff isn't going to cut it anymore.
You think it was Jobs or was it Cook? Or maybe it's both of them, right? I mean, Tim's done an excellent job executing, to your point, to this transformation. I mean, it is amazing, and people still want the next product versus all the competitors, even though it costs twice as much. It's kind of
and they don't even care about the product; they want to be plugged into the infrastructure, into the ecosystem.
That is part of the product. You're right. Is the connectivity. So
if it was just the products, nobody would buy them. But they made it not about the products.
Yeah.
They made it about the experience, which they could only do with a digital transformation.
So did we answer the question, Thom, about who leads?
Yeah. I don't know.
Obviously, IT.
It's been the friendliest battle that we're going to have. I think they're going to get nastier as we move forward. Really quick, I'll give you each 15 seconds for your last point. Mark, you go first.
Okay, well, I think this has been a great discussion. This is the kind of thing Craig and I have done over the years. And I think, back from Socrates and Plato in early Greece, the start of our civilization, they believed that dialogue is how we learn. And I think that's come out today. We've covered some great topics. Anybody who's confused about how this should happen, I think got some great insights, not an answer, but guidance.
That's well said, Mark. And I would just add to that, if there's a topic that's on your mind that you would like us to do this kind of format with, we'd be glad to do that. Just send it along to us. Like I said at the beginning, we have a few more we've been thinking about that are on our minds. But we'd love to hear from you about what topics would you like us to debate, even maybe a couple of the key questions if you think there's something we're not scratching that we should be scratching, one of those itches you just wish we would give some attention to.
Well, thank you to the two of you, and thank you to everybody who tuned in and listened. If you enjoyed this week's episode, make sure you keep coming back for future battles, because we're going to cover lots of different topics here on the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. And if you're not a member of the Digital Enterprise Society, be sure that you register today for free using the promo code DES plus 2001. This will ensure that you're the first one to get the latest podcast episodes. You'll get information of what's coming out. You'll get information about Mark's blog, Digital Guideposts, and other exciting offerings from the Digital Enterprise Society. Always remember this, the Digital Enterprise Society, it is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Go check us out right now at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.